All right, I've been given the okay to start this program, so good evening, everyone. My name is Anna Marie Spadaru, and I'm the current president of Women in Philanthropy, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this very interesting program, which is called, as you can see on the screen, What Impact Does Technology Have on Relationships? It's going to be an informative discussion with a group of UCLA experts in the relationship and technology field. So for those of you who are not familiar with Women in Philanthropy, we are an organization that's going to be celebrating its 25th anniversary in June. And our mission is to recognize women that donate to UCLA and encourage leadership opportunities for them on several boards on campus, and other leadership opportunities, volunteer leadership opportunities. And also what we do is have programs like this evening's program that give us a chance to our members and their guests to participate and learn about all kinds of interesting topics, usually with presenters from our own extraordinary faculty. So I'm happy to welcome you to this event. The program is going to be tonight. I'm really looking forward to it because my husband would tell you that I am addicted to my iPad. And it's interesting to find out if other people are addicted to media communication. I don't do social media, but I take my iPad everywhere. And there are so many questions about the impact of technology on relationships among adults, relationship among children. And it's clear from the number of you that are attending tonight that there are quite a few of us that have those kind of questions. So we're looking forward to learning from the experts in the field that will explore the beneficial and harmful implications of technology on personal connections. And from what the informal discussion that I've heard among the panel members, I think we're all going to learn a lot of very interesting things, some of them pretty scary and some of them positive, actually. Especially if you have teenagers, it's kind of a concern as to how much time they spend talking to their phone as opposed to talking to other people. So it'd be my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Mina Newberg. Mina is actually a double Bruin. She has a BA in psychology and an MBA from UCLA. Her career has focused on bringing together marketing practices, consumer insights, and innovation to create dramatic changes that benefit the companies and clients that she works with. She's currently the Chief Marketing Officer at Revolution Math. Revolution Math is an after-school math program for elementary school students. And she's in charge of overseeing the brand development, sales, marketing, and school partnerships. And it's clearly very important to develop math skills at a very young age, particularly for young girls that were told several years ago that they couldn't be good at math. Mina began her career at RAND Corporation, where she was a research analyst in the health and education group. And throughout her career, she has had a great deal of experience facilitating group discussions. So we are thrilled to have her help us this evening. Please give a warm Women in Philanthropy welcome to Mina Newberg.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And before we start, I just want to give a big thank you to Anne-Marie, who has over 30 years of dedication to UCLA, which is truly unparalleled, and for kind of leading the Women in Philanthropy group. So thank you so much, Anne-Marie. So to get started, we're going to do just a quick introduction of each of our panelists, and then I'll turn the floor over to them to give a longer introduction of themselves, tell us a little bit about their areas of research, and then we have a few questions, and we'll open it up to Q&A. So first, I'm going to start by introducing Yalda Oels. Yalda is a former studio executive turned researcher, which always makes for an interesting story. She's the founder and the executive director of the Center for Scholars and Storytellers. She's the author of an excellent book, Media Moms, Digital Dads, for every adolescent parent out there. The book is necessary. And really her area of research focuses on how media affects young people and really taking a fact rather than fear approach towards parenting and raising adolescents. Next, we have Dr. Bilder. He focuses on the impact of technology and on social and emotional development, and particularly on smartphone addiction, maybe iPad addiction. And he's the Tenenbaum Family Professor of Psychiatry, Biobehavioral Sciences, and Psychology. We have Dr. Jana Yvonne. She's the professor of developmental psychology. She focuses on young adolescent peer relationships and adjustment. She's written 3 books and almost 120 published articles. And then we have Dr. Ben Kearney. He's a professor of social psychology. He's the co-founder of the UCLA Relationship Institute, and he's an adjunct behavioral scientist at RAND. And he focuses on intimate relationships and the environmental factors that affect those intimate relationships, with a particular focus on marriage. So I'm excited to get this panel started because we have so many different perspectives, different areas of expertise. So I'm going to turn it over to the panel. Yalda, if you want to give a little more background on
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction and for showing my book. So as you heard, I was in the film business, so I learned the art of creating media. And then when I became a mom, I got my PhD and worked with Dr. Yvonne in developmental psychology at UCLA, studying how media affects kids. My focus is the social and emotional effects of media on children. And at the Center for Scholars and Storytellers, my focus is bridging 2 groups of people and sort of bridging my past expertise. Did it go away? My past expertise as an entertainment person with my current expertise as a researcher scholar, and bringing these 2 groups together, researchers and entertainment and storytellers, to share information about how research can inform stories to improve content for kids. So my focus is kids, adolescents, and media.
I'm Bob Builder. I'm better remembered as Bob the Builder. I changed my middle name for that. And,
Bob the Builder. Sorry.
Yes, we
had to say it.
but I'm a neuropsychologist, so I'm a brain-oriented person. So everything I look at, I try to figure out, well, how does the brain do that? And that includes technology. I really got interested in it 16 years ago when I started a randomized controlled trial, which is, we had twins. And a boy and a girl, and I've been watching them. But no, I started teaching about personal brain management, thinking about how changes in technology are altering the way that we actually use our brains, and thereby are introducing us to a new world that is by definition unimaginable because we are going to change the way we think. So I started teaching courses in personal brain management, writing about personal brain management, and thinking about, well, what does technology do to our brains? How does technology alter the way we use our brains? And so that led me to be thinking about, the way that technology hooks us. How does it interact with the reward systems in our brain? How does it get us sucked in? And what are the ways that impacts us? And as it turns out, I thought it's relevant to this panel because I believe that the same brain systems that are used to interact with other members of the species are being hijacked by some of the technology that we use, and that it has created a sort of an addictive profile that explains why it's so widely used, explains some of the dangers, but also explains how we might be able to use it for good instead of evil. So I'll leave it to that.
So again, my name is Jana Yvonne, and I'm a developmental psychologist here, and I study the social lives of adolescents. And you might say I study the good, bad, and ugly of their social lives. And although I do most of my research in the context of schools, right now we really can't understand their social lives without understanding the spillover from the online world to school and from school to the online. So these lives are very much connected, and we need to understand both. I totally agree that we need to understand both the good and evil in all of this. I study friendships, but my main focus has been on bullying. And so, in fact, most of my research on online has to do with cyberbullying, which I will talk about much more once we get going.
My name is Benjamin Kearney. I'm a social psychologist here at UCLA. And for the last 25 years, I've been studying intimate connections, intimate relationships, and specifically, and often in the context of marriage, but I'm interested in intimacy more broadly. And what drives a lot of my work is predicting what happens to couples who are in love. And what happens, of course, is that some couples stay in love, some couples don't, and some couples break up. And in the context of marriage, that's a very costly outcome sometimes. So my focus was always on, and has always been on, prediction. And it's a hard thing to do. It's always been a very hard thing to do. So I got involved with the technological aspect about 10 years ago when commercials started coming out saying that online companies like eHarmony and Match.com and Chemistry.com could predict which two strangers would have a successful relationship. I said, really? And I've been at this for a while, and I think that's a very difficult thing to create. So I got together with some other researchers, and we went and looked at the actual research, as much as we could find it, to see was there any basis for those claims. And spoiler warning, there was no basis. But it's got us thinking more continuously about the effect of online technologies and dating apps on the subsequent relationships that people form. So that's how I get to this.
Great. So I'd love to kind of delve into the issues that we see and maybe using your research for each of you to inform kind of what you see the biggest issues and I'd say opportunities with how technology affects the way that we form relationships, whether it's adolescence and bullying or in marriage. I'd love to kind of have you talk about both sides of it. Do you want to start us, Dr. Kearney?
Sure. People ask me all the time, has dating apps, the rise of Tinder and eHarmony, has that changed relationships? Are we in a new era when it comes to relationships? And the answer, won't surprise you, is we are and we aren't. Here's what's new. What's new is people have new ways of meeting each other that they didn't have before. So there's something amazing about technology that can let you know through wherever you're standing, who's available and meets your search criteria around you. That's an incredible thing. It's especially incredible for people who are interested in same-sex relationships. Because prior to the online, you have to do an elaborate system of codes to figure out who's eligible. Now, people are advertising digitally, I'm eligible. And that's amazing. For people in thin dating markets, it's a new world. That's the new. Here's what isn't new. The things that keep relationships going once you meet somebody, the things that form romantic chemistry, turn out to have little to do with what you can share online. And this is the most exciting research that's out there, is showing that the psychological processes that people use to evaluate an online picture or profile are totally distinct than the processes we use to evaluate somebody who's in front of my face. When you're evaluating online, it's a cognitive process. It's a deliberative process. It has all sorts of characteristics. When you're evaluating somebody in front of your face, it's an emotional process. It's an intuitive process. You're responding to someone's behavior and responsiveness. An online photo has no behavior, has no responsiveness. So the problem with that is, if you like someone's profile, it doesn't predict whether you're going to like them when they're sitting across from you. Which means that the only way to find out if you're really going to get along with someone is the old-fashioned way. And that's, of course, not what the dating apps are selling. So that really, it leads to a lot of disappointment. Dating apps say, we're going to find you a match. The answer is, no, the dating app's going to find you and someone who's available. Only you can find a match. That's what the latest research suggests. So from my perspective, there's revolutionary developments in finding people, and it's the same old primate stuff in terms of actually connecting. That's what I think.
And I'm just a quick follow-up question on that. Is there data on kind of the success of marriages, since I know you do focus on marriage, of people who kind of started their relationship in person versus started their relationship online?
The problem is there's no experiment. So you can't randomly assign people to meet online or in a bar. Okay, you two online. So there is some evidence that suggests that people who meet online marry quicker and maybe are a little happier. But they're a different group. The people who go online to find a partner are very dedicated to finding a partner. And so it's not such a surprise that they might get married quicker once they do find a partner and maybe even stay committed to those relationships. It doesn't mean that meeting online necessarily promotes better relationships. It just means, especially if you go to a website that specializes in like, find your spouse here, it means that the people you find there are interested in settling down. That's not a bad thing. If you're looking for someone to settle down with, go to where they hang out. But the processes that keep relationships solid are still going to be responding to your partner, being open to your partner, things that you have to just do and that haven't changed much.
Great.
Not with an iPad?
Jana, what are you seeing?
Well, for me, the question always is, how does the online environment change? What's different about it than being face-to-face? In addition to, we can talk about that facilitates meeting people, but in terms of how, for example, in my case, how does it change either bullying behavior or bullying experiences? And if I have to pin it down to one word, it's amplification. And how this amplification shows is two ways. When you are in front of your screen, whether it's your phone or your computer, it's much easier to be aggressive. It's much easier to say something really nasty or do something pretty awful. There are no social cues. You don't get any feedback. You just say something and you don't think about it and off it goes. At the same time, when we talk about teens, what we know is that today's teens feel more comfortable self-disclosing, meaning saying something really intimate about themselves online rather than face-to-face. So what that does is creates this very volatile combination, a perfect storm, where there's lots of material out there that is abused by someone, something very private that somebody said, but it stayed up there. I mean, maybe one of the most extreme forms with teenage romantic relationships is sexting. So the new normal about very intimate romantic relationships, and sometimes they're not, maybe they're just budding sexual relationships with teenagers, is to exchange pictures of themselves, fairly naked or completely naked. It is a form of intimacy, but the kids don't think about how permanent these pictures are. So subsequently, they get abused. And so to me, that is the essence. That is the core issue, what we need to think about in terms of thinking about why are these relationships and the interactions and the social experiences so different. And think about also the kid who then is the target of these experiences. In the old days, it was they were in front of their Facebook pages where they have a reminder that they have 356 friends, so-called friends. And then somebody says something really nasty to them. And guess what? None of the 300-some friends say anything nice in return. So this is where I had one of those early predictions completely wrong. I predicted that we know that when there's a bullying situation in school, kids are very unlikely to intervene. Even if they think that it's really wrong that somebody gets bullied. I thought that the online world would give more affordances, more opportunities for somebody to be nice to the kid who gets bullied and say something, privately at least. And they don't. Actually, helpful bystander behavior online is actually more rare than in face-to-face situations. So we've had a few predictions where we were completely wrong in terms of how the online environment is going to change our relationships. For example, very early on, when kids, not all of their peers were online, we were very concerned about social displacement, so that they no longer will have any offline friends because now everything is happening online. And those days, because their peers were not, everybody was connected, but they were actually connecting with strangers. So there were lots of concerns about that. But now that everybody's online, what we get support for is rich get richer. The kids who have really active social lives in real life, they are the ones who have most connections online. Unfortunately, also those who are not doing too well in school, for example, socially connecting, having lots of friends, they also have trouble connecting and having good experiences online. And all these experiences are just really, really detrimental when kids experience them online. And in part, we can sort of think about the role of parents. We as parents, we often are not privy to what's going on in the offline, in the online lives of kids. So we may not know what's going on at school, but we definitely don't know what's going on online. And therefore, we are not in the position to help. And moreover, the kids are reluctant to come to us to tell about what they encounter online, because if they're younger, they are concerned about losing their privileges to their phone and access. And if they're older, they think, I should be able to handle this.
So it sounds like as a parent, and I'm a parent of 4, the kind of, I'm going to take your phone away, which I know is my first instinct, does not help that situation. No. It's really kind of engaging in that conversation.
Absolutely.
So kind of for other parents who are out there or people who will be in this situation, what are the recommendations that you have for us?
Well, I think talking about before these nasty things happen is absolutely essential. So you have to, I mean, this is where I feel that, we can't keep up with the technology that kids are using. As researchers, I'm always a few steps behind. The time that we collect data and the time that the study comes out as a publication, there's a 2-year lag on average. So by the time our results come out, they are outdated because the kids are using something else. So it used to be, texting, and now it's Snapchat and it's Instagram, for example. So you have to keep up with technology, which is a big challenge. We have still this huge generation gap. I mean, it's shrinking over time. So I'm sure, Mina, you are more familiar with all the platforms that your lovely daughters use than, for example, my generation. So keeping up with the technology and really trying to understand it. But I think that one really great role that parents can take is to tell their kid, teach me, how does that work? Mm-hmm. Pretending to be the student is really, really helpful because your kid is like, let me show you, Mom. Hey, Dad, you just don't get it. Let me show you. But I think that Hjalta has much more to say about the parenting practices.
Dr. Golden.
Well, the one thing that really struck me about what Jana was saying has to do with when you started your comments, you're talking about amplification. Mm-hmm. But one of the reasons I believe it may be an amplified message is because it is actually condensed. Mm-hmm. And the communications we have online are actually much less rich than is the full bandwidth human interactive experience. And so I was just commenting before that a colleague of mine at Stanford is in a dormitory and is responsible for a bunch of students. He asked the students to put their phones away for a day and come back at the end of the day after going around and talking to other students to relate what happened to them. Well, all the students came back and they were exhausted because they had been, having to have face-to-face interactions in full bandwidth, actually talking and processing all of this additional information. So I think if we think through what happens in the context, if you take all the things that you might feel or express to another person and put that into a text message, in a couple hundred characters or in a snap image that disappears instantaneously. Mm-hmm. Think of what you're doing in robbing the richness of human interaction and boiling it down to just this ersatz kind of experience. And there's a great author, if you haven't seen him, Jaron Lanier, wrote a great book called You Are Not a Gadget, which talked about what's happening in all forms of media, which is taking the original experience and the richness of experience and trying to boil it down. He calls it, there's a race to see who can be the most meta, who can come up with the hashtag that encapsulates an entire rich experience. So rather than reading Proust, remembrances of things past for a couple of years. There's an Instagram that goes out where it disappears in less time than it took to make it. And so he says that in doing so, we're actually robbing ourselves of this rich experience, but it does lead to these condensed forms of expression where people just let stuff out as if it would have no impact, but they could be having a great impact. And there's a lot of room for misinterpretation of a few words that, depending on your frame of mind, may be taken in totally the wrong way. But then other people also can just distance themselves from it because, it was only a text. It wasn't actually like I had a real interaction with that person. So I think by this process of condensing and distancing ourselves from the actual interpersonal reality, that we're making it more difficult for our youth and those of us who are being captured by the technology to engage in these full bandwidth human communications. So that's where I see the risk.
Yeah.
And if we think about it from a physiological and anatomy perspective, because I know you're looking at kind of the brain development and how it matches with that, what are we seeing from a brain development standpoint?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is when we look to see which regions of the brain are engaged, and this is the way you can always convince people, if you're lacking the ability to convince them, is to show them colorful pictures of the brain.
Yeah, it's true.
Suggesting it's true. Actually, there's a great study done in our
Yes,
UCLA psychology
yes.
department where you just take the same evidence and you put a colorful picture of the brain next to one set of evidence, and you don't put a colorful picture of the brain
That's
next
so
to
funny.
the same evidence and randomize it properly, and then you find that, it's much more credible if it comes with a fancy brain. But anyway, when we do those,
That's why he always puts
that's
that
I
there.
Yeah.
the brain images.
I'm going to try that.
And I have some if we need them right back. But no, when you look at exactly which systems are engaged, I mean, it's exactly the kind of reward systems, but a particular branch of them that is displaced ventrally in the brain. So it overlaps a lot with the same systems that are used for processing interpersonal interactions. It also happens to be the same regions that are responsive to stimulant addictions, not opiate addictions as much, but stimulant addictions. So what I believe is actually happening in these circumstances is people are getting stimulated with a very high dose of short-acting social injection. It's as if when I text this, I might be getting, this tweet is going to get me 1 million followers. And then I tweet it, and so I have a moment. There's a surge of, I'll say dopamine, even though I hate saying that it's attributable to one transmitter or another. Anybody who talks about something is due to a transmitter, you know that they're BSing you, okay? But anyway, so it's more complicated than that, but still it's those systems that are involved. And I think what happens is we get this brief, fleeting feeling that we are going to get incredibly rewarded. And then, and occasionally it does happen, but it's a lottery mentality, basically, that is capitalized on there. And usually the sender ends up being disappointed, but they'll go back the same way somebody goes back for a lottery ticket again, and so I'll try it again. And so I think that there's this process. But in terms of the brain circuitry, it's really hitting the same circuits that are engaged if we actually do fall in lust with others. The challenge is that what we want to do is fall in love with others, and that involves displacing things more into the future and doing things in a more sustained way. And I think that's where the technology is actually bringing us back to briefer, less sustained forms of reward and less sustained forms of happiness, where what we would like to be supporting is more sustained forms of happiness.
Great, thank you.
Whoa, am I really loud? It seems like I'm really loud. So I've been studying this stuff for over 10 years, and I came to the graduate program, to the PhD program, 2 years after the iPhone was introduced. And my daughter was 9 years old. And at the time, I was really, really worried about technology. And I did a study where I looked at what happened when kids spent 5 days without phones. I was wondering what would happen with, if we are spending all our time staring at screens instead of at faces, how does that affect our ability to understand nonverbal emotional cues, which are very important for communication, for empathy building, for social interaction. And so we designed this study where we had these kids spend 5 days without screens, and we compared them to kids who were on screens as normal. And what we found is in those 5 days, the kids that spent no time on screens at all, they were in an outdoor education camp, so they were spending intense time socializing, interacting with other people. Those kids improved on their ability to understand nonverbal emotional cues. And at the time, we looked at it and we thought, okay, this is not because screens are taking away their ability to communicate. It's really that we need to be in person. We need to learn how to communicate in person. This is how we learn how to communicate, and this is the best way to communicate. So that was sort of my initial foray into this. At this point, my kids are a lot older. I have one in college. They spend a lot of time on screens. You know, I come from the film business. We like screens. But they've survived. They're doing really, really well. They're, you know, one's in college, the other one's, you know, taking many APs, and screens haven't really, you know, ruined their lives. And I started, and we've just started studying this stuff. This stuff is happening so quickly. It's only been about 10, 15 years. And as Jana said, research moves really slowly, but technology moves very quickly. And so it's really hard to study, and it's changing all the time. So when I did that camp study, that was 5 years ago, and we looked at the kids in 2012, that's when they were communicating primarily through text. Now it's a visual medium. There are photographs, there are videos. YouTube is the #1 network. You know, they're looking at videos all the time. It's replicating the real worlds, and we don't know how that might change the experience. So the short answer is it's complicated. We don't really know, and it's really hard to keep up. But there have been a lot of studies on adolescent development. There have been a lot of studies on, you know, using things like Facebook. And what we found is basically that development isn't changing. Kids aren't changing. I have a quote from a focus group that we did where they said, adults don't get it. I'm not addicted to technology. I'm addicted to my friends. When I was a teen, I was addicted to my friends. You know, that is just a normal developmental thing to want to be with your peers, but we've now given them this tool that they can take everywhere, and they can be with their friends anytime, any of the day, anywhere, on family vacations, at the dinner table, in their bedroom, places that they were not with their friends. But what they want are the same things. They're doing identity development, you know, by posting different pictures on Instagram. They're testing it. By sending a Snapchat to another friend, they're actually communicating and sharing information in the way that we used to. But it does amplify, and the risk is that it might replace in-person time. There is a statistic that is, and I'm generally quite positive, so I hesitate to share this, but there is a statistics from Common Sense Research. In 2012, over half of kids, teenagers, said their favorite way to communicate with other teenagers was in person, and that was higher than texting or social media. Today, only a third of teens say their favorite way to communicate is in person. And it's about equal as texting. So they're starting to use this more and more and more. So, you know, the question is, what are the costs of that? If they're actually, maybe it's good that they're communicating using this stuff. Maybe they're, you know, for autistic kids, for example, being able to socialize without on screens and without the pressure of the face-to-face communication. It's a lot of social pressure. Sometimes it helps them to have this way to communicate. From marginalized populations across you know, the world, it's a way for them to communicate. For displaced families, it's a way for them to communicate. So in some ways, it strengthens those relationships, but in other ways, it may actually harm relationships. And the one thing I would add to the cyberbullying thing is that, you know, and Jana sort of alluded to this, the effects of cyberbullying in general are more negative than the effects in-person cyberbullying. And part of it is that, that it's also, you can't escape it. It follows you home from the schoolyard. It's 24/7, it's viral, and it can immediately spread, and it feels permanent. So that becomes really challenging. So in some cases, the effects are actually stronger in normal teenage behavior, but this tool can make it amplify in a negative way.
You know, it's interesting, Monica Lewinsky talks about she says that she's the first victim of cyberbullying.
Yeah.
And that was many decades ago. Are we seeing kind of what is the longitudinal change that we're seeing in cyberbullying over the past few decades?
I would actually, Jana's the expert.
So we just see more of bullying taking place also online. It doesn't mean that there's less of it face to face. So it's just now yet another platform where that kind of behavior takes place and where kids are experiencing that. I want to follow up one really interesting point that Yalda was talking about, the sort of adolescent identity surge. So, you know, this is a really interesting platform to think about the online environment, that this gives kids more tools to sort of think about who they are, present themselves to others, to craft and polish the public self that they want to put out there. But this actually, again, it's yet another example of it can go awry, right? Because these selves that kids put out there, the pictures that they share with others about themselves on Instagram and other platforms, they are perfect. So everybody's pictures, they are beautiful, they're gorgeous, they are having fun, they have lots of friends, they go to the right kind of parties, they go on vacations. My God, everybody else's life is so fabulous. So it's this, I can't keep up with it. And in fact, what we know about it is that there are a group of kids who craft themselves a lot. In fact, Tinder, where it's all about swiping the pictures of potential romantic partners, is a major culprit in this, because the dating scene for young adults, later adolescents, it's now all about looks. And you swipe quickly, and you go through like hundreds of pictures, and what's the only thing that you look at is that carefully crafted self out there. And the kids who are now wanting to sort of practice this self-expression, the bar is higher and higher and higher, because you have hard time keeping up with it. And the kids who then have given up crafting themselves online, they are more of the passive users. So they just go and look at other people's profiles and other people's pictures. That is actually one behavior that predicts depression in adolescents. So it is this sort of passive construction and witnessing of how cool everybody else's life is compared to mine.
FOMO.
And
Fear of missing out.
Yeah, and Dr. Kearney, what are we seeing in terms of, this is adolescence, as we look at kind of older individuals and looking for more everlasting relationships? How is social media playing in after, and technology in general, after they've met, either in person or online, and you know their communication patterns have really changed? How does technology factor into that?
People have been asking since the dawn of technology, how is this affecting communication? So you can imagine we could have the same panel 150 years ago, and the question is, well, people are going to stop writing letters. That's just terrible. With all of these telephones, they'll be on the phone all the time, and they'll lose the ability to write, which is exactly what happened, it seems. I point that out to say that with every new technology, there are some concerns that it's going to fundamentally change things. My sense from looking at adult relationships is that relating happens. Our desire to relate is so basic and so fundamental that people are willing to risk their lives to do it, which I think is why people text and drive. Mm-hmm. So I think that Bob's talking about how you get this sort of surge of reward, and it's so rewarding that even though I know it's a very stupid thing to look at my phone while I'm driving, if I hear that ping, it's very hard not to look. So what it means is there are more avenues to connect. We're the same connecting human beings and connecting organisms that we've always been, and now there's more ways. We used to have to write letters and see and look in person. Then there was a telephone, and then there was texting, and now there's video chatting. There's so many more ways to connect, which you've heard panelists say several times that the technology tends to amplify our humanity. And I think that's certainly true in the realm of adult relationships. So if you're in a good relationship, if there's somebody that you care about, somebody that you love, all this technology means you have many ways to love that person, which is fantastic. On the other hand, if there's someone that irritates you, or someone who wants to do you harm, or someone who wants to bully you, now there's many more avenues for that person to do you harm, to stalk you, or to intrude in your life in an unwanted way. So I don't have a sense that our human nature is fundamentally altering, but we're developing technologies that make it easier. Just like the vacuum cleaner made vacuuming easier, these communication technologies make communication easier for good and for bad.
Interesting. And Dr. Builder, from in terms of that addiction element that we've talked about and that amplification element, we hear about technology, pieces of technology like our iPads getting even more addictive. What are the aspects of it that really make it addictive?
Well, I think that part of it is our brain is sort of divided up into two fundamental systems that have evolved from input processing and output processing systems. And generally speaking, the technologies have done a fantastic job of bringing to us more input. So if you think about it, we're constantly being pinged, tweeted, buzzed, and the technology is bringing to us this myriad of inputs from throughout the world. I developed during the last election cycle a Trump news addiction because I just couldn't stand not knowing what insane thing had happened.
Crazy thing happened today.
But that's, there's this instantaneous access to communication, but it's all input channel. Now, at the same time, if we think about, well, what's the rest of the brain do? The rest of the brain is the prospective, projectional, action-oriented brain. And so there is software that's been developed to help us do our to-do lists. It's not very sexy, it's not very exciting. I have something called OmniFocus, which enables me to keep 1,000 to-do items that I will never do, hierarchically organized and time-stamped and contexted, and but it becomes another input device because it's just, so we're swamped in input to the point where I can literally sit in my office all day just responding to email. And so another fun thing, if you haven't seen it, is the IBZ videos by Merlin Mann, Inbox Zero. How many people have 0 messages in their inbox right now? Yay! You must have a good mom.
Or no email.
The thing is that if you are spending, like I do, all day processing email messages, what you're doing is everybody who has my email address has just told me what to do. I have been given instructions from everybody in the rest of the world. I'm in responsive mode all day long. And I could just do that for the rest of my life. And so I have to constantly pull myself back and try to, what do I want to do? What is my goal? And so it's what the technology has done is hijack this part of our brain. We have fancy words for it, we call it the paleocortex. And what we want to do is move the activations to this other bits of our brain that actually govern our forward-looking plans and our goals. And it turns out that some of the therapies that are the most effective really focus on identifying what are long-term values and goals, and then making sure our actions are aligned with those. But by being buffeted by inputs and the technology that's increased are being buffeted by inputs, it's taking us away from that uniquely human aspect of planning and goal-directed, passionate pursuit of what we want.
And do you have thoughts on what to do about this? Right, we've talked a lot about the negatives. Have you seen techniques or efforts that have really helped to combat this?
Yeah, well, I think that that's why I mentioned Jaron Lanier earlier. I think this book, You Are Not a Gadget, really highlights with technology. Technology is just technology. What you do with the technology is up to you. It's not up to the technology. So he talks about a number of things that you can do to try to get out of that cycle. One of which is when you post something online, never do it anonymously. Always do it as authentically. That's from you. It's not from Finsta. Does everybody know about Finsta? I have 16-year-old twins, but anyhow, so it's your fake Instagram account as opposed to your real, anyhow. So
Finsta,
It's not
right?
as ominous as
Finsta.
it sounds.
Yeah.
I was told I was very hip by some
Yes.
college students when I knew what a Finsta was.
I know.
It's an old, but I think that makes a huge difference is having authenticity to what we're doing, and also to be spending the time where a lot of the digested stuff is basically just immediately a mashup of stuff that just happened. In contrast, what Jaron Lanier recommends is actually investing time. Put in 100 hours into the video that you put online, not just a replay of what just happened on the corner. And so the investment of human creative energy, really putting yourself out there, identifying it as yourself, those are some of the things that he recommends. In addition to put your iPad down, talk to the.
Yeah, I mean, other ideas are turn off your notifications. You probably shouldn't have the ping on in your car. And there is
A lot of shaming going on right now.
Auto messages, sorry, I'm driving.
Yeah, you could put that on. There is research that shows that even having a phone upside down when you're sitting across from someone, it's distracting and makes the person across from you feel less connected. It's upside down, even if there's no sound, but they know that you are drawn to it and you might want to look at it. And there's even there's sort of very specific research about whether you're giving cognitive resources to whether you're going to do worse on tests of cognitive functioning, and when the phone is even either right next to you or even right down on the floor, you do worse on these tests. The only way that students, these were tested with college students, did better is when it was in the other room. So put it in the other room. Have device-free zones, either rooms or at dinner, or go on a walk with your kid and don't bring your phone. Turn off the notifications, turn off the sounds, turn off the vibrations. Find times of the day where if you have a family or you're with other people, find times of the day where everybody puts it down for even 10 minutes and you have a conversation. I think that's very important for kids to learn. And for those of you with young kids, if there are people here or grandchildren, make sure that when they are young, you are not looking at your phone all the time. The parental use of media and children's use of media is highly correlated, and usually parents use media more than kids. So that is the number one predictor of how much media a kid will use, is how much media parents use. So when they're young, in particular, when they really don't care, they don't have their own devices, hopefully, they don't care, they don't want to sit in front of a TV, try to spend some time just making them know that this is about our time together. Role model, that this device is not the most important thing in my life, things like that.
Can I add?
Yes.
Again, when you think about teenagers, as you may recall, teenagers, by definition, they become night owls, right? So they want to go to bed later and later, and that's part of the, sort of reflects their hormonal changes. And now you add to this the device. Guess what happens? So late at night, they're not ready for bed. Girls, are you listening? You don't want to go to bed. If you have access to your phone, you get stimulated. You are so excited because the juiciest rumors go around late at night, right? So you keep doing that late at night, and what does that do? It actually prolongs even further. It sort of feeds your hormonal changes in terms of melatonin levels, keeping you up, and you're feeding the frenzy, and the kids get less and less sleep, and therefore they are incredibly irritable in the morning. No. Not only that, they are irritable. The dad of the 16-year-old twin says so. But but they also do really poorly at school. So they are not able to concentrate because they did not get enough sleep. So I don't think we've also really talked enough about these kind of secondary effects. Sleep is actually one of the biggest dangers for adolescent brain in terms of technology interfering with sleep.
I'd like to add one thing to that while you mention that, is that these devices are emitters of blue-green light. And so the way that our brain gets signaled, what's our normal circadian rhythm, is from being out in the sun at noon. So that's got a lot of blue-green light. It stimulates this is, if you wanted to have a fancy word, say what you learned tonight, the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus. Just remember, suprachiasmatic nucleus. And it gets stimulated, and it synchronizes all the cells in your body to think it is now high noon. So what's happening with our youth is, as we're looking at these screens after dark, is that it's triggering our brain to think, oh, it's high noon. And so it's really messing up our brains. We gave our students at UCLA open access in a randomized controlled trial where we gave them an app for free that would change their phones and their computers and just make the tint on the screen a little bit more orange. They call it night shift or F-lux, depending on which, anyhow. So I thought this was just going to be a way to instruct students of how to do a randomized controlled trial. There'd be no chance of getting any meaningful results. But we found that the students who installed the active software, we had a placebo-controlled software, sham, the students who got the real thing had a sleep onset latency. In other words, went to sleep 5 minutes faster than the other students. It had a significant effect. So, yeah. So, that's not, it's just been presented so far.
You heard it here first.
But yeah, that's what it's hot off the press.
That's a good one.
But anyhow, I think that, there's this other factor that, in addition to the excitement,
Yes.
it's actually, ruining our brain.
Ruining our
All right, well, I want to open up to questions from the audience. So give a little time for folks here to ask questions. So if you have a question, yes. We have folks coming around with mics. So why don't we start over here?
I was wondering if all of this technology affecting our ability to concentrate.
Into the mic so that everything.
I was wondering if all the new technology is affecting our brain's ability to focus and sit and read a book, for instance. Or is it affecting our attention span?
I'll let you in, but I don't know of research that actually has measured that. So I know there's a lot of anecdotal evidence and a lot of people who talk about that, but I don't know of actually any research that has measured that specifically. I can tell you today, I actually thought this was funny. This woman, I was at a conference earlier today, and this woman talked about how young kids today have such short attention spans. We give them, we give them, like, say, oh, you can only have 140 characters for the tweet. You can only, we can only do a 15-second. We can't have you watch something for a minute. It's got to be shorter, and then it's 8 seconds. And she goes, and then we realized all of a sudden that many kids actually listen to 3-hour podcasts. So I sometimes think we underestimate what kids want. And we say that, oh, they've got these short attention spans, they can't do this. But there are ways that they are engaging on a deeper level that we aren't even thinking about.
Yeah. I mean, I agree completely. And I think that the existing literature is really, unfortunately, poor. And part of the difficulty, though, as Ben was talking about earlier, is that doing a randomized controlled trial, the sine qua non of experiment, you just can't do it. We can't randomly assign half the people to be on their phones and the rest not. So we're seeing experiments in nature unfold. But I mean, there's plenty of evidence of the culture shifting to short attention span for many things. Look at the snippets that we get on media and the news. I mean, there's a tracking of, phrase length that we can process has decreased substantially over the last decades. But at the same time, the capacity for video gaming is dramatically enhanced. So I think that it remains unknown how these practices are unfolding. But we know we can change the way our brains work. The more you exercise certain faculties, they're going to change. They're going to get better. And we know now from lots of good experiments that that your brain is changing when those things happen. Now, whether that's good or bad, that depends. I mean, one of the best experiments that was done on, I don't know how many people have seen the taxi cab driver study, where. Yeah, so there was this great study done in London. The streets are very complicated, so somebody looked at the brain and they saw, oh, maybe we'll look at the brain, see if it's any different than taxi cab drivers. Found bigger hippocampus, part of the brain that they were associating with, nonverbal spatial learning and memory. And then they said, well, but you don't know, maybe just people with big hippocampi go into taxi cab drivers. They did a longitudinal study to sort this out. And they found that when the more people studied the taxi cab routes, the bigger their hippocampus got. So this is great news, right? You can go and train your brain and make your hippocampus big. Well, it turns out that a little known part of that study was the adverse effect was as your hippocampus got bigger, you became unable to do other visuospatial learning and memory tasks. So it was as if their brains got full of London city streets and couldn't learn other stuff. I mean, I'm anthropomorphizing a little bit, but I think that the point is that there's an opportunity cost. So we can train our brains, but what we're doing when we do that, we have to be cautious about.
Next question. Yes, over here.
You talked a lot about kids and developing things that they're
Oh, thanks, buddy. Can you speak to a little bit how in intimate relationships or friendships as an adult, technology, like for those of us who are millennials and grew up in the in-between, or even just as adults in committed relationships, use technology and how that changes how we communicate for the positive or negative?
We're looking at you. We're all looking at you.
Start with the offline world. In real life, what makes communication effective? There's lots of research on this, that what we want from our partners, whether it's our friends or family or our intimates, is communication that is responsive. And in real life, there are many avenues of communication. It's come up a couple times on the stage. There are multiple avenues of communication through which I can convey responsiveness to you. I can you can see my responsiveness in my face. You can see it in the posture. I can lean forward and be interested in you. Or I can say, or yes, I hear you, or I care about you. Now, in some ways, digital technology, smartphones, texting, provides another avenue to express all of that responsiveness that we want from our partners. So that's a good thing. And if it's if it's paired with all of the other ways that we communicate, that just expands our repertoire, as I was saying earlier. The problem is that the digital path by itself is very constrained. So when you communicate a text, even and a happy face emoji, doesn't have a lot of information in it. So it's kind of an impoverished way to communicate. So what kind of advice does that lead to? It leads that if you're texting with a friend or partner, complements, expands the other communication, other ways that you respond, that's great. Now you're more connected to that person. If it replaces, then you're actually constraining the information exchange between you, and that probably doesn't facilitate, doesn't nourish the communication. So now there's not data. My sense is that, again, you've heard on the stage, that mostly it's the rich that get richer. So most people, the people you text the most are the people you interact with offline the most. The person I text the absolute most in my life, my wife. I'm coming home, it's also the person I talk to in real life the most. So the implication of that is that texting is not hurting our communication. It's just offering, for most people, it's offering a new way. Now that's in relationships. Again, what Jana's talking about is what happens when you're testing with people that you aren't in relationships with. And that's where it seemed like it could go bad, and does go bad.
Yeah. But again, so I think that, we were chatting ahead of time a little bit about where do we fall in terms of how bad and good online communication is. And I think all of us recognize both. So for example, there's no question with teenagers that there are lots of positives in terms of friendship maintenance. And when it is, this kind of positive feedback exchange, nothing wrong about it. Nothing bad is going to happen, obviously. So it is maybe when it gets to the point that you can't be without the device because you really wanted to talk to, because you're so used to talking any time of the day, any place where you are with your pals. And now when you don't have access to it, you have little withdrawal symptoms, or, you get irritated. And indeed, it's this sort of fear of missing out. I don't know what's happening. I feel so, what they went to this place and now I don't know what happened and who went. So it's this frenzy about, wanting to be part of everything that happens in the peer world.
I think you had a question, yes.
I was wondering if any of you could speak to the issue of the impact technology is having on the K-12 students in the classroom with the one-on-one devices.
How technology is impacting students in the classroom, K through 12.
Correct.
Just technology.
Well, so there's been tests, in the beginning of technology, in the beginning of time, when iPads were introduced, there was sort of this rush to get them into the classroom at a very young age, starting in kindergarten. And if you know LAUSD, we had a superintendent that he was determined to get one iPad, a one-to-one program that means each student has an iPad, and it all went bust. It ended up that, he started with middle school and, that we just weren't ready for it. And I think the research has basically shown that it's not the panacea for solving educational problems. There are places, the problem is when you introduce technology, if you haven't given the teachers the professional development to use the tools, either they don't use them, they're terrified of them, they don't know how, they think the kids know more, or they just use it as a paper replacement, which is not that great either. So until you really train teachers to use it in a way that actually enriches the learning, which in some cases it can, it's a waste of money, time, and resources. It's definitely not a teacher replacement. And in particular in the younger ages, why do you need it? Under third grade, do you really need to teach kids? I mean, you do need to teach them technology. I mean, 8 out of 10 of the top new jobs are technology oriented. New jobs are invented, that we don't even know about all the time. Like there's technology is something kids need to learn. And in fact, kids who come from lower socioeconomic statuses, they don't have computers in their home. They don't have laptops. They have to use their phones to access the internet. They're at a disadvantage than other kids. And for them to be able to learn how to use keyboards and things like that in the school is very helpful for their future job prospects. So you do need it, but it's not going to solve every educational challenge.
There's one thing I would just add to that, and it's ironically from being part of a committee at UCLA that reviews a curricula that we're implementing, and part of it is in the life sciences core here. And I just saw a new math curriculum that they're introducing that makes extensive use of simulations. So I think that there is a point to speaking to what's going to happen in the future as technology becomes better adopted in the classrooms. An entire new way of teaching is going to be possible. So that, for example, the understanding of statistics is completely revolutionized when you're not just looking at dull formulas, but instead can actually just simulate an entire experiment. And that's the way that data analysis is going. So anyhow, I think that
absolutely.
It's one of the rare positive things I'll say about technology.
Well,
but I think it's a big thing.
Yeah, so many of you probably have heard about flipped classrooms. So flipped classroom is that the kids actually view a video, very short clip at home, about some new concept. And they do their homework or part of it based on that. But moreover, then they come to the classroom where they either work in groups and or with the instructor getting face-to-face help. So that's one, I think, so it's a great example of technology being used, but it actually, in this case, facilitates the face-to-face interaction in the classroom.
Get
Yeah,
to
and
what's uniquely human.
So you get this message very quickly at home. And this is now used more and more. It's starting to get used in, for example, for community colleges. So everybody views this very quick video of a demonstration or a lesson by a very good, effective instructor. Typically, they hire the very best. We can find these, the Khan Academy was one of the first well-known companies that started doing this math instruction. And so they would just explain one math concept very quickly, and then the kids go to the classroom, to the teacher and to their peers and say, but I still couldn't figure this part out. So how does this work? And then they work face to face, and that's wonderful because now we've actually used it well, and we've increased the face-to-face interaction and learning.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Okay. Yeah.
You've given us kind of a tease about imaging and about some of the anatomy and physiology of the brain. Could you talk a little more about imaging and remodeling of the anatomy and the physiology of the brain as a result of the use of technology?
Yeah.
You got 4 minutes.
I think that what's really been exciting to those of us involved in these neuroscience domains is we've moved from a place where 20 years ago it was thought that the brain was not very plastic. It was thought that neurons don't regenerate at all, and that once you have gotten to the old age of 25 or so, not much happens. That you basically are born with you get this number of neurons, you develop the connections, and then you lose them over time. Some of us faster than others. And what we've learned instead is that there is some capacity for the generation of new neurons under the right circumstances. And even more than that, that's also a little controversial, and it's probably overstated by some. Anyhow, that aside, the capacity to form new connections and to remold our brains is much more profound than anybody ever thought. And so people have been hammering away at different kinds of experiments trying to see, well, exactly what kind of remodeling can be done, what kind of synaptic configurations can change. And we now are seeing that, yes, you can go in and you can change the patterns of gene expression in particular regions. And the more we learn about it, it really suggests that this remodeling is, and I'm really sad to say it, because 20 years ago, people would say to me, oh, the brain is just like a muscle. You exercise it and it changes. And I say, oh, that's nonsense. The brain is nothing like a muscle. Well, it turns out the more we learn, it actually seems pretty true, that the brain is sort of like the more you exercise certain circuits, the more you can beef them up. We can see it very rapidly. You can see brain structural changes within an hour of exercising certain neuronal elements if you got the right technology. And with grosser technology, you can see after a week or two of exercise of just typical games, you can see change in the size of brain structures. So the thing that we don't know is how to cross-train well. So in the gym, physical exercise, a lot of work has been done, so we don't just go and exercise our pinky or our left bicep, unless you happen to be a left bicep weightlifter or something. I don't know what. But you get the idea is, we'd be imbalanced if we did that. But that's what people are doing and playing like Lumosity and Brain HQ games out there. They're hammering away at certain functions, like taxi cab drivers might have been with the city streets of London, at the expense of other well-balanced, brain exercise. So, I mean, the key things that we try to tell people when we're asked, well, what do you prescribe then? We say, well, probably the best thing is to interact with other people. That's a really good exercise, a high bandwidth, interpersonal communication, and exercise, because that aerobic work also helps to expand your brain, and then live an active mental life, have fun, enjoy, and do what you believe in. So those circuits seem to be the ones that lead to the most sustained happiness.
Great, thank you.
All right. Well, I would like to thank our panel, Mina, Robert, Jana, Benjamin, and Yetta, for a very interesting conversation. One of the good things about technology, talking about writing, is when I first moved to this country 40 years ago, the way to keep in touch with my family was to write a letter, send it, and wait 2 weeks to get the response back. Whereas now I can Skype with my son who lives in Europe every day for free. So I think there are good things about
Absolutely.
On the iPad.
technology on the iPad.
That's why you're on the iPad.
That's on the iPad. So I would like to thank them again for this very interesting conversation, and thank all of you for coming and listening, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and tell you that our next major event for Women in Philanthropy will be our 25th anniversary celebration, which will be on June 19th, and it's going to be composed of an interesting educational component as well as a very nice lunch. So I hope many of you will be joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.